Hello and welcome to the March or Die show today. Glad to have you joining me. This is the show where we do our very best every single episode to give you both the perspectives and principles you need to march when it would be easier to stay where you are and die. And today we have a great guest on that talks, it's about an issue that is very culturally relevant, but puts a lot of people in that position where they'll just stay where they are and just go with the flow, when really what they need to do is stand up and march. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But again, thank you for joining and looking forward to getting into that conversation. If you have not yet subscribed to the show, please go ahead and do that right now, wherever you're listening from. Go ahead and subscribe. That helps you. That helps me. And it would be great to know you're out there and you're listening. And I'd also love to hear from you if possible. And the best way to do that is on YouTube. Go to YouTube. You can find the March or Die channel there. This content is there, of course, and it is easy for you to leave comments and communicate with us there. So we would love to hear from you. Don't want to spend a lot of time on the intro today. Want to jump right into this conversation. My guest today is Dustin Garrett. Dustin has, a wonderful story of God's redemption and God's redemptive plan. Made some decisions when he was very young that led to he and his girlfriend. I think he was in 8th grade. He talks about this in the interview. His girlfriend got pregnant. He had an abortion, or they had an abortion, and he talks a lot about that and the impact of that on him and on her. Pushed him into really a life of drug use and abuse and all that comes along with that. But then God got a hold of his life and has done an incredible work of redemption in his life. And now he has the opportunity to serve others, to work with those who are going through similar issues to those that he experienced. Just a wonderful, wonderful story. And beyond just being a great story, very practical and very helpful. When we talk about how to march when it would be easier to stay where you are and die, so often we find ourselves in these life situations that we would not have created for ourselves. Maybe they're because of bad decisions and those circumstances that we would rather not be a part of, but here we are. So what do we do? How do we move forward? And there are a lot of answers to that. We talk about that often on this show. But understanding God's grace, God's redemptive work, allowing God to use our past for his purpose and the ability to serve and minister to others is a big part of moving forward. And very grateful for this conversation and grateful for Dustin, his time. And I know that this will be a conversation that will be helpful to you and one that you will want to share out with others. So without further ado, Dustin Garrett. Dustin, thanks for joining me, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
I really do appreciate your time. I know you are a busy man. Your story is one that you've told, obviously people are aware of, but it's one that when I heard it, I thought we need to talk about that because maybe the specifics of it are different. A lot of people would not be able to relate specifically to your story. But the path from complete brokenness to a life of use to God and continuing to use your story to minister to others, really, that's what I try to communicate here. If I could communicate one thing, it's this. You have a story, you have a past. It's different from one person to another. Mm-hmm. But regardless, God has a plan for that and wants to use it. And you've allowed your story, as painful and difficult as it is, to be used to be a blessing to others. And so I really appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on and talking about it. But let's just start from the beginning. Sure. I'd love to hear your story and then kind of your journey to faith, and then we'll kind of work from there.
Yeah, no, I'd be glad to. And again, thanks for having me. Well, I grew up in the kind of the Chicagoland area, Northwest Indiana. Northwest Indiana kind of just gets absorbed as Chicago.
It is Chicago.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but, grew up and, and at an early age, obviously started getting into drugs and all that sort of stuff. But I got kicked out of school multiple times. I never even made it to high school. Was kicked out twice before. And then after that, just never made it to high school. And, I had a long family heritage of addiction and things like that.
Sure.
And so as a young man, it wasn't very hard for me to get into that world. And a lot of people ask, was there some sort of, trauma or something like that? For me, I'll tell you the truth, it was sheerly just pleasure seeking. I was, whatever could bring me pleasure, I was completely just unhinged towards seeking that out in just full throttle. And so whatever brought me even an ounce of pleasure, I would then abuse that to the nth degree. And when I was 15 years old, again, I'd been kicked out of school and I was selling drugs at school, and my girlfriend had gotten pregnant. And, when you're 15 and, you find out, you get a call that, your girlfriend's on the other line saying, hey, I'm pregnant. This was back in the day. So I'm 41 years old now. So this was, 26 years ago.
A couple years ago. But back then there was no cell phones. There was phones in the house. They had these really long cords on them, they would get all tangled up. And she was on the phone with me talking about this. And back then on a landline, if you picked up the phone in another room, you could listen in on what was going on. And that day, her parents had picked up the phone to listen in on what me and her were talking about. And I remember after her telling me, I heard a voice over the line say, hang up the phone now. Wow.
And the next thing I knew, me and her parents and my parents were in a basement talking about what we should do, because I was 15, she was 15. We hadn't really yet made it to high school. We're in middle school,
Wow.
And so the decision was made. I remember sitting there just feeling a bit helpless. And the decision was made that she would terminate the pregnancy, she would have an abortion, and that I would pay for it. And I remember after that, there was a sense of initial relief that came over, because the idea of having a kid and being a father was so beyond what I could fathom at that time. And to tell you the truth, the lie that was there was that having a kid would ruin your life.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's still the lie that is promulgated, that if you have a kid, your life is over. And so that was initially, it was like, okay, all right. Okay. Well, there was a relief there. And then I can still recall here 26 years later, the phone call I got from my girlfriend after she had the abortion, and her describing that process, because at that time, I believe she was about 3 months pregnant, and her describing the process of them with, cold tools, performing this. And she was crying on the phone to me, describing this.
Yeah.
And it was at that time I began to kind of, it switched. It went, instead of being a relief, it began to be a just incredible burden on my conscience of what have we done. I began to think, like, oh, was it a boy or a girl? I began to think about, those sorts of things. And I remember talking to my dad about it at that time. And in an attempt to console me, my dad then shared with me that before I was born, my mom had an abortion.
Wow.
And it was like, that actually ended up bringing up more questions, and my 15-year-old mind was like, well, would I still be here if she wouldn't have, would I have an older brother or sister? I had no ability to be able to reckon with and reconcile those sorts of questions. And so obviously at that time with that, then, it made more sense to seek out pleasure instead of having to deal with that. So both me and my girlfriend then got further into drugs, end up using heroin. And at the, tender age of 16, I was then a full blown heroin addict at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. So Not going to school made it to where I had just all the time in the world to just do whatever I wanted to do.
When I was reading your story, I started to think about your parents because, for a lot of reasons, I guess. But I have kids. My kid's a little bit older, but I have 2 teenage kids now. And what does that do to you to, first of all, have your parents say, "This is what you need to do," and then when things go sideways and you're having the feelings that you're having, and I'm sure they were doing the best they could, but what did that do kind of beyond that moment with your parents and your relationship with them? And what did, I don't know exactly how to ask the question other than, your support system is the one who's pushing you into this place of just brokenness.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's a good question. And I don't think I realized it at the time, but the fact that, that they made that decision, definitely broke a massive amount of trust, even though I wouldn't have been able to articulate that at the time.
Right. Sure.
It also made us feel quite helpless, but even later on, I look at it and it was still my decision.
Of course.
And even if they wouldn't have pushed us towards that, I would have still made that decision. And I think, like you said, my parents grew up in a situation where it's like, they could only give me so much of what, they got. And they were, I think, trying to do the best with what they had. I've tried to talk to my parents about this later on in life.
Sure.
And, some of the pain that's around that is just a little too deep, even, this much time has gone by, which is one of the reasons why I like to talk about it like this. I truly believe that bringing some of these things into the light is where you start to begin to really see some healing on it. And that's one thing with my parents now. I mean, I think we've come a long way, my parents and I, and in fact, I mean, obviously, spoiler alert, I'm no longer a heroin addict. But we'll get into that. But it's undoubtable for them that they have seen God transform my life. And so for them, even now, I've seen God use that to redeem their interest in the things of God. And there's been multiple people in my family, my sister, for one, who went down a similar path that I did, but also went down a similar path that I did and sought the Lord and has been serving in her church and going on mission trips and things like that. So there has been some redemption that's there. But in regards to your question, I look back and I don't hold anything against him for that. But I also am honest with the fact that did, after that, I did feel like I could do whatever I want, and my parents couldn't say anything to me, because the trust had been completely broken, and it was, again, they were trying to, I think, be helpful, but in fact, just I think kind of made things a bit worse.
Well, and I think as a parent, we're always trying to do better than our parents. Whether you have great parents or parents that weren't so great, that's our standard, right? That's our starting point, and we're always trying to do a little bit better than that. And so, parenting's crazy anyhow. So you're just trying to do the best you can.
Yeah, and I will say that both of our parents at that time, they were drowning. I had 2 younger sisters. My girlfriend family had multiple siblings, and so I think they were coming to terms with if they didn't terminate the pregnancy, they would have absorbed that, and I don't think they could bear the thought of what it would be like to bring another human into each of their situations. And again, but now, hindsight definitely is 2020. After that happened, and me and my girlfriend both kind of plunged ourselves headlong into drug addiction. what we thought a child would ruin our life, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
That decision was the catalyst for a just massive amount of lifelong pain. And so much so that my girlfriend ended up losing her life due to drug addiction. Wow. And which is why I'm able here to sit here and talk to you about it today. I did get to talk to her later on after, I had come to know the Lord and tell her about the forgiveness that exists in Jesus. And I'm grateful for that. But also, I don't hear a lot of men talking about abortion from the side of how it's affected them, how they've been complicit in it, or how an abortion in their family has deeply affected them.
Yeah.
And so that's what I really hope to get to do, is to talk about it and to shed some light that it profoundly affected me and still does to this day.
How did you come to faith? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so being the one thing about being plunged into the depths of heroin addiction is that you're gonna come to the realization that you are a slave,
right?
And
sure.
then. And also, typically, it also comes with massive consequences like jail time and losing of everything. And the one good thing about losing everything and those sort of things is that the Lord can really use that to show you His great need for Himself. Sure. So after years of addiction, and my family knew that I was in that, they had brought me to methadone clinics and psychotherapy and put me on drugs to get me off drugs. I had been in and out of jail more times than you can count. And after, just trying everything to try to get me to not go down that route. And because I was destroying the whole family. Sure. I mean, I was stealing from everybody. Everything would disappear. I had cops coming to the house all the time. I had the U.S. Marshals come one time and pretty much interrogate my sisters on where I was. It was awful. I was wreaking havoc in the family, and not only in my immediate family, anybody who had any sort of contact with me. You were putting yourself at risk of things that weren't good. Right. And so, it was one of those times I had gotten arrested and I was in jail. And when I got into the jail, they had asked me a question like, have you ever thought about taking your own life? And I said, all the time. Because at that time, it's not so much that I wanted to die. I just wanted to be free from the misery that I had just heaped upon myself from all the terrible decisions that I was making. But as soon as I said, I think about that all the time, a group of kind of SWAT guys in all, black clothes came and took me. And I remember their elevator ride up to the top floor of this jail, where they then stripped me of all my clothes and put me in a concrete cell. And it was there for a week that I went through heroin withdrawals, and it was brutal. I remember it was a 4th of July weekend because they had a sliver of a window. They had a sliver of a window that was probably like 3 inches. And I could see out the window that there were fireworks happening. I remember that. And it was in that cell that I remember just crying out to Jesus, Jesus, please save me. I was scared not only of, I came to grips that I was just a completely dead in sin and enslaved to sin, but also that not only I needed saving from my life, that at that point I was really contemplating wanting to die. And if I did die, I had no security on where that would be. And praise God that I did have a grandma growing up. Her name was Granny. We all called her Granny. And Granny was the one in their family who was always telling people that they needed Jesus. Now, granted, Granny was her Her evangelistic tactics were questionable. I mean, she was kind of like the all truth, no grace. Like she thought she could just hit you upside the head with a Bible and it would stick.
Right.
But there was no denying that my grandma looked to Jesus as God, that he was the one who was sustaining her life, and he was the one who gave the hope for the life beyond this one. And it was because I think of her testimony that even caused me to recall Jesus as the one who I needed and I needed to reach out to. And it was in that cell that I think genuinely I did, like Romans says, I called on the name of the Lord, like from my heart of hearts, Jesus, please save me. That was probably, I mean, it was probably the most theological prayer I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I remember getting out of that jail cell and realizing that I had a different desire in my heart. Like I actually wanted to stop doing drugs and stop destroying my life. And I that was the first time that desire was there. All the times before, I kind of wanted to avoid the consequences that were there from the drugs. Yeah. But I still wanted to keep doing it. You know what I mean? I wanted to find a loophole. This was the first time that I think genuinely I was like, okay, I need God. I need God in my life. I want to change my whole life. Now, I wish I could tell you right after that, everything was hunky dory, bunnies and rainbows. And after that, there was probably about a 4-year period where I really tried hard, but I was still living in the same area, still running with the same people. And you know what it says, bad company will just corrupt. Yeah. But I remember at that time, even though I was still doing the things I was doing, like I hated it. Like I hated it. And it made me just kind of really hate that and long to be set free. And finally, this is one thing, here's a redemptive side for my family. My dad came to me and said, I'm going to give you 2 choices. Either I'm going to take you down to this program I heard about in Central Illinois through a rescue mission there. We're going to get in the car right now and you're going to go. Or if you are here at the house, I'm going to call the police.
Wow. Those are quite the choices.
Yeah, and he actually put it on paper and made me sign it. I remember sitting at the table, like, because I was at this point in time, this is the thing about doing drugs for that long. You become very, very adapted to manipulating everybody around you. Sure. It is not uncommon to find somebody deep in drug addiction to how they've survived and how they've managed to pull it off for as long as they have is they become very good at manipulating and deceiving. And a lot of times they're deceiving themselves too. Sure, so it's not like they have some great plan that they, some deception plan down in the basement on a whiteboard. It's they genuinely are deceived themselves, so much so that they're able to convince others. Yeah. And so he had to make it very clear because I was always finding loopholes, and now that I have a 3-year-old son, I can kind of see the same desire, like finding loopholes, like, I see it. I spent about after that a few weeks just living on the streets, living from house to house, person to person, until finally I just said, all right, I give up. I'm ready to go to this program. And so my dad drove me down from Chicago area down to Peoria, Illinois. It was about a 3-hour drive. It was one of the longest drives of my life. We said nothing to each other. I had nothing. Even the clothes I had on my back were not mine. They were ones I took from other people. The only thing I had was a bunch of debt, a bunch of legal issues. I had and a bunch of broken relationships. That's all I had. And we showed up to the rescue mission. And I then at the rescue mission there's a long-term men's recovery program. And I got into that. And for the first time in my life, some men came alongside of me, cracked open the Bible and said, This is who you are. This is who God is. This is what Jesus has done. And they began having me memorize scripture day in and day out.
Wow. Yeah.
And like it says, the truth then set me free. It was the first time in my life I was able to say no to the things that were destroying me by the power of the Spirit through the Word of God.
Right.
It was so clear to me that because I had tried everything else, I had tried all the world had to offer. It was so clear to me when I first began to be like, no, I'm not doing that. Or God, please help me obey this that I read today. And he gave me the strength to do it. And he gave me their victories there to do it. And it was so incredible. That time of my life, even though I was homeless, it was the most joyful time that I had ever had in the past decade at that point.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I was running around doing all sorts of stuff at that time that people would think is fun. So anyway, I spent 2 years there at the rescue mission, 2 years. Wow. And by the end of that, I started actually helping out some of the young men who were coming in because I was like, hey, I want to be helpful. You know what I mean? Right. I want to be helpful. And I think I know the answer here. I started seeing these guys and I was helping out some of these young men and I started asking, some deeper theological questions to my counselors at the rescue mission. And finally they said, hey, maybe have you ever thought about going to Bible college or going into ministry? You seem like the type of person that wants to do this. Do you want to do ministry stuff? And I was like, you mean helping people? Yeah, yeah. Of course, of course that's what I want. If I got pulled out of this pit and I see other people in there, how could I not want to be like, yo, this is the way? And so at that time, though, they said, we think you should look into going to Bible college. And I remember laughing at them because I was like, I didn't graduate. I never went to high school. I never even went to I got kicked out before I even, the freshman year. I don't have any money. I'm homeless and I was a heroin addict for 10 years. This does not look good on paper.
Let's go to Bible college.
So which college is going to be like, ooh, that's the one.
That's our guy. That's our guy right there.
Put him in. But by God's grace, the director of the rescue mission at that time, he had seen me now for years at this point. And the college that he graduated from, which is in Kansas City, Missouri, he wrote a big long letter saying, hey, I know this looks bad, but I think you should take a chance on this guy. And the president of the college at the time was a classmate of the director of the rescue mission. Wow. And so he had kind of an ear, there. Yeah. And sure enough, they accepted me to go to Kansas City to go to Bible college straight out of the rescue mission. And I remember praying too that God would give me an opportunity to go somewhere other than Chicago at that time. Because I knew that if I had gone back there, it was like a war zone. Yeah. Like I had been in a war zone for 10 years and I just wasn't able at that time to be able to grapple with even being in that area. Yep. And so I went off to Bible college, and at Bible college, the first year, I met a lovely young lady, ended up getting married, and then I ended up working for the school. They just pretty much said, hey, we want you to go around, tell your story, tell people about this college. Yeah. At that time, I started playing guitar, too, and started leading music at the school. And then I ended up staying there in Bible college for 7 years. Because once I got married and I started working, I started just doing classes part-time because again, I wasn't able to handle, a ton in regards to that. And I tell this story too. I think the Lord, if looking at my life, if you're checking on Dustin in the oven, he says not done yet. Need a little more time. It needs a little more time. A little more time. So what's funny is that with the 2 years at the rescue mission, the near 7 years at Bible college, it had now been almost a decade on the other side of a decade of heroin use. Yep. And it was at that time I really felt like it was there was an old man. It was a different life. It was like that was totally dead. And what's hard is that if somebody would have came to me when I first went to the rescue mission and said, hang in there, it's going to take about a decade. Yeah, right. There's some people that have miraculous stories that they just get complete. It goes from one day to the next, and they never look back. For me, it was a long period of time of renewing my mind. But then looking back, honestly, it was the most wonderful time. Like, it wasn't like all that time was just wasted. In fact, there was if they would have said to me, hey, it's going to take next 10 years of abundant life. Okay. And then cool. Yeah. That's great. And that's what I try to tell young men now. I get calls all the time from parents or people who have somebody in their family who is addicted to something and struggling. And even the thought of going to a long-term recovery program for a year sounds like an eternity to them, because they think they have to, it's like going backwards, and they don't see it as it's moving forward. It's, in fact, it's advancing you forward at just an astronomical rate. Right. And so that time was just crucial for me. And it was during the time at Bible college, I began to wrestle with the abortion topic, and I began to have a framework of God's sovereignty that was able to answer some of my questions. And I was able to really have an understanding of the grace and mercy of God that was big enough to meet me in that, but also it not being fully resolved. Right. Meaning that some of the questions that I still have around the abortion won't be answered this side of eternity, but I was able to rest and find peace in that. And God is still using that to bring some redemption about. Yeah. And so, now I've been married for 14 years. Wow. I have 2 lovely little rugrats running around the house here. I never thought there was a while there, and maybe somebody listening to this will resonate with this. There was a while, even after I was a Christian, that I thought I would never have kids, because it was like to atone for my sin of abortion. Right. And that God was going to settle the score by never giving me kids. I don't think I ever said it out loud, but it was when I realized it was a belief that was there. I realized that what I was actually believing is that what Jesus did wasn't enough. That God needed to punish me more for that, and that's just not true. Right. That's not true. Right. And so when I've seen these babies come into my life, and that's one of the things now I really try to help folks, that bringing, whether it's a child or a human, into and taking care of them. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's a burden. Yeah, but it's more of a blessing that it is, and you won't regret it. It will enrich your life. I have not met anybody who's had a child who looks back and goes, "Man, I wish they ruined my life. I wish I would have never had them." Right. I mean, I could see some like, I wish I was never born. That's something I've heard. But to say that there's a child in your life that hasn't made your life more enriched, and they are a blessing. It's hard. It is hard, but they're not there to ruin your life. In fact, they will enrich your life in ways that it never would have if there wasn't. And so that's one of the things I like to talk about and talk to young men about. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so this is something you mentioned or you talk about, is that, anytime there's an abortion that takes place, there's also a young man,
there is
whatever.
There
it's
is
a part of that, right?
It is, yes.
And that's something we do not. It's interesting. So I think in the Christian community, we give more credence to that. But in the world at large, abortion is entirely a woman's issue, right? And if you're a man, you have nothing to say on this. What do you say? So if I was, I was a 17-year-old guy, 18-year-old guy, whatever, and someone connected me to you, and my girlfriend's pregnant, she's getting ready to have an abortion. She's talking about it. That's what she wants to do. What do you say to me? So there's probably like 2 lanes there, right? One is, if you can stop it, but maybe you can't. What do you say to me, the guy who is also a big part of this situation?
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right in that in the culture at large, they've kind of kicked men out of this conversation. And what I don't think that they realize that does is then it gives men a free pass to, they have no responsibility in it.
Right. Right.
And that's the worst thing that you could do in that scenario.
And then they scream about men acting like they have no responsibility, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
We've created this culture and here we are. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Instead, they should say, hey, the men need to be valuing our women in a place where we're not putting them in a situation where we're telling them to do that. And there's so much nuance here that I try to be careful to tread here, because there's situations like mine where, we were underage. And, we were trying to do what our parents said. And so there's some grace that's there. There's also situations where on one end of the spectrum, it's people using abortion like, birth control. Yeah. And there's another end of the spectrum where it's people who feel like they're totally trapped and they have no other options. And we have done, at least in the church context, I feel like especially in these past years, since, there's been a lot more science to pretty much, that argument is kind of out the window as far as some of the science stuff. But, 30 years ago, like when my mom had an abortion, there was probably a lot more women who were genuinely under the belief that this was not a human. You know what I mean? Like, and so we got to take that into account too. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that it's a loss of life, and doesn't change the fact that it's a terrible sin. It doesn't change the fact that on the backside of the abortion, there's lifelong agony and regret over that. But there are reasons people make decisions, though. There are reasons, and it doesn't make it to where one is, it's like one, like it's you get a pass from that, but it should be at least considered. Like when I see people really railing about abortion, usually like if I was to talk to them, I would ask them like, have you had one? A lot of times that's the case, is that they're trying to appease their conscience about a decision that they made, and really going hard about, no, this isn't wrong, because they don't want it to be. And then there's some people that know it's wrong, and they are living with that secret, and they take that secret to the grave. And that is something that just will eat you away. Sure. And so creating an environment where, one, we can talk about this in a way that is wrapped in grace and forgiveness, that highlights the gospel, but also doesn't downplay just how terrible it is and how much damage it does. And like to hold those two in tension is there. And also, for folks that have gone through it and are on the other side of it, sometimes it's tough to talk about it because you're trying to respect the story of the other person as well. Right. And so back to your question, though, if you're a 17-year-old man and you're in this case, I would definitely first and foremost, I would say, hey, do you have a good church that you're a part of? You need to throw yourself at the mercy of if you're not, you need to throw yourself at the mercy, because here's the thing. The church has been in the past, since I've been alive, has done a good job of pointing out the horrors of abortion and the truth of abortion. And there are places, though, that provide on the backside. Well, if we tell people, if we're pointing at them and say, don't do that, we also have to take that same finger and say, do this. Right. We have to take them somewhere, and we have to say, hey, we're going to take you and we're going to help you. Yep. We're going to help you out. And unfortunately, those places don't get all the news. They don't get they don't get all the spotlights. And so to have more places like that, to where, okay, let's say somebody's coming to you and going, hey, we don't want to have this abortion, but we feel like we have no other option. We have no resource. Our family is maxed out. We're, all this sort of stuff. To have Christians who are saying, we will help you. In order, though, for that to be the case, you have to throw yourself at the mercy of them. Right. I would say, if you're not a part of a church, find a church, meet up with the elders and say, listen, we made this mistake and we're wanting to do the right thing and we desperately need help. Please help us. We don't know where to go and what to do.
Yeah.
And if those folks at that church have any ounce of the Spirit of God operating in them, then they would probably say, "Thank you. We are glad to help you. We will take you in. Come on, let's do this."
Yep.
But they don't know unless you tell them. They don't know. And it takes a level of humility to go into a place like that and say, I made a mistake.
For sure.
I made a mistake and I need help. And the situations I've seen where people have done that, they have been met with grace upon mercy, upon resource, upon resource. And there's a bunch of resources out there that are parachurch organizations that are just standing ready, that if you find yourself in a situation where there's an unplanned pregnancy, they will unleash the resource upon you.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So
right.
Find those places but it also means you're going to have to come to grips with being open and honest. And we don't like to do that. Sure. But then as a church, we also have to come to a spot where if we see somebody genuinely trying to repent and do the right thing, we need to take them right where they are, and help them. So that would be my advice to a young man in that situation. And hopefully that church could not only help them resource-wise, but help him, counsel him through how he should interact with his girlfriend or whoever that is, because there's all sorts of complex relational things that are going on. And each situation would need its own specific counsel in order to help them navigate those waters.
What do you say to someone who, so what you just described is an ideal situation, ideal response to a very bad situation, right?
Yeah.
But what do you say to a guy who says, my girlfriend is going to do this, there's nothing I can do to stop it? I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know what to do with that. What do I do with that? What do you say to that guy?
It's a really tough situation, that does happen. There are situations where men want to have the child, and either the woman or the girl or the family is dead set on that not being the case. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those areas where, I'm telling you, it affects men deeply. I mean, when you have a child, when a man looks at his child, there is just an overwhelming amount of joy and connection. And I mean, it's not like they're like, well, that was just the lady. Like I can look at my kids right now, and I can look at my daughter and say, she has my same big giant bug eyes. I can see, she's got my same nose. I can see those things, and men wonder about that, and they delight in that. And, and if they're in a situation like that and they really are pleading and they're doing everything they can, that's a really tough situation to be in. It is. And I mean, I have heard scenarios where by the grace of God, when the woman or the family sees the man go, hey, I know I don't have it all together, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I will do whatever it takes in this situation, that they have relented, because it does further perpetuate if the man's like, hey, this is not my problem. Yeah. Hey, I don't have anything to say here. Hey, I just want to sweep this under the rug. Hey, this is not my child. All those sorts of things are typically what come out of the man, and to try to avoid the responsibility, which again, then you can kind of see why women and families would be tempted to say, okay, we're going to do something else. I can't see a way forward, here. And so that's why for me right now, when hopefully when I talk to young men who are being before this situation, it's kind of a preventative measure to say, hey, listen, you need to respect these women. And and you need to seriously consider, if you're wanting to be with her in that sort of way, then you need to lock in a scenario of security for her family, and that looks like marriage. That way you can then pursue these things, because otherwise it's going to bring about a whole heap of trouble.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And I think, your original advice is always good, is get into a church family and hopefully surround yourself with people that, regardless of how this thing turns out, you've got the right people to help you work through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to your last question too, I mean, if let's say that situation played out, there's going to be a loss. There's going to be grief that's there. And that's another area of, if you think abortion is not going to be a death grief, a grieving of a loss of a life.
Yeah.
And if you don't reckon with that, it will just stay in that space. And so that young man, if that did happen, he would need help to work through what that grief is. And he would need to, have some ability to reconcile those things that are happening. But also, there's another thing too, why it would be good to get plugged into a good church that's solid. It's because there's a lot of resource out there for post-abortive folks, whether men or women. Some of it is helpful and some of it is downright unbiblical. There's stuff out there that starts to get into the mystical of being able to talk to your child, and things like that. Sure. And when people are just looking for resources and looking for help and trying to find answers, if they don't have a good, solid biblical framework or people that are guiding them, it's not uncommon for them to stumble onto all sorts of weird ideas of what's actually going on with their, with their child and what God says about that. And so I would say that's another area too. If you're a church or somebody you're listening out there and you don't have some good, solid resources around how to navigate the loss, and this is really the loss of any loved one. I have family members who think that when you die that you become an angel and you're floating around, and you're kind of always hanging around there. Now the Bible says that we become like angels, but not angels. So that's a great example of where very quickly, and you get these on like this theology online too, where you see these things and you don't realize that people just pick that up and they think that it's biblical. Yep. So that would be one thing I would strongly encourage folks listening out there. First, you obviously got to talk about it. You got to bring it into the light. And then you got to line it up with the scriptures to what actually is true. And then that will actually be the way forward.
Yeah, that's good. Man, there's a lot here. The work that you do now is I think an interesting kind of bridge from like your previous life, right, to the work that you're doing now with Samaritan Ministries. Talk a little bit about Samaritan Ministries and what that represents. Yeah, totally. It represents more than healthcare, right?
It does. Well, and when I was graduating Bible college, I remember the option. I was planning on going back and working at the rescue mission. That was the plan, right? Okay, I can go back there. There's plenty of work to do. The job security, the people are constantly getting themselves into addictions. But the doors kind of closed up there. My wife had some family here in the Peoria area, and so we kind of had our heart towards this area. And when we started looking to it at the end of college, it just was, there wasn't, the doors were kind of closing there. And so I had found out from a mutual friend, there was a place called Samaritan Ministries in Peoria that was a healthcare sharing ministry. Now, at the time, I knew nothing about that, but the idea of working in healthcare, nobody grows up like, man, I'm going to grow up and be in healthcare. Like the idea of that for me, especially the life that I was living, it's like, okay, who am I to talk about that? But what I found out is that Samaritan is a healthcare sharing ministry that's been around for 30 years. And what they do is they coordinate the sharing of medical needs in the body of Christ. And here's the redemption story, is that in our time frame right now, when you think about healthcare in the country, one of the big giant topics is that abortion is healthcare. Yeah. And trying to get payment for abortion in that way. And so what Samaritan is an option for people to have their medical needs met without funding anything like abortion. And so when you think, like for me, when I think about, okay, I would love to see the generation I'm in just really wake up around this topic and end abortion. Just be something that, I mean, obviously people are always going to be doing terrible things, but in this idea that abortion is good, and in this lie that children are going to ruin your life.
Yeah. Right.
But one way to do that is to defund, just start pulling resources.
Yeah.
And so Samaritan is an option that does that. And so now for me, it's not only a place I get to work and say, hey, here's an option. You know, if you're a pastor or a church leader or somebody who loves the Lord and you're like, man, I just really, I'm passionate about this abortion issue, but then you're turning around and paying $2,000 a month to a company who is supporting it. There's a bit of a disconnect that's there. And so to be able to say, I'm going to take my money and put it into over here, that's a real tangible way for me. And even now, like, can you sit here and talk to you about it? I get to talk about it in my role at Samaritan and talk about it freely, and not only talk about it, but then offer up a tangible solution to people. Say, hey, what should we do if we are trying to, you know, kind of wage war against this and trying to see this to no longer be. And so this is one option for that. I've been at Samaritan now for about 10 years, and I get up on stages at concerts and talk about Samaritan. I get to, you know, I did a lot of homeschool conferences and conventions. I get to do a lot of events and things like that for the majority of my time at Samaritan. And if you would have told me, you know, 15 years ago that I would be up on a stage, you know, in front of, you know, 10,000 people, talking about, you know, how to love one another in a very practical way, I couldn't have fathomed that. In fact, the rescue mission that I came from in Peoria, I remember there's an arena across the street, and I remember being at the rescue mission, seeing events going on there. And now when there's events going on there, I can go there and I can get on stage and talk to people about what God has done. And actually, tomorrow night, there's an event going on there. It's a concert going on there, a Christian concert. And I'm planning on getting 40 or 50 homeless folks into the concert. So they now let me get all the folks from the rescue mission in there. And so it's those sorts of things that make it to where awesome. I'm working at Samaritan now. And if there's anybody out there who, a lot of times, if you're, just turning 26 or you're trying to change jobs or you want to retire early or you don't like your current healthcare, you're paying way too much, they're not able to get the care that you want to get. Samaritan is an awesome option for Christians to not only have, I think, better care, but it to be way less expensive and have way more freedom. And again, Samaritan's been doing this now for over 30 years, but I would say the church has been doing what we're doing for thousands of years.
Sure.
The Samaritan model of Christians meeting each other's medical needs is not a new concept. This is Acts chapter 2. People were meeting each other's needs. And that's what we're doing at Samaritan, just zeroing in on medical needs. And in this time in our country where healthcare is just a really hot topic, it's a very easy way for Christians to shine bright. And the scriptures say that they'll know we are his disciples by our love for one another. Yep. This is just a great way to do that, not only to shine that light, but also to get your family's healthcare needs taken care of, and keeping it inside of just a giant Christian community. It's awesome. Right now there's, just under 300,000 folks with Samaritan sharing, tens of millions of dollars every month. And over the course of the time, it's been, just really billions of dollars that have moved around Christian to Christian, household to household. And not only the money moving around, but Samaritan's big thing is we're coordinating a massive prayer effort. So when people have medical needs, they are tender to the encouragement and prayer of others. So we are coordinating a massive prayer effort. And one of the things that insurance companies can't do is meet a spiritual need when there's a medical need going on. And every single medical need that's happening is an opportunity for Jesus to make him more like himself. And he does that all the time. Go look at your church's prayer list, and I almost guarantee that there's a giant amount of people on that prayer list. It's physiological medical needs, cancer or a baby or a broken leg or whatever it may be. And praying for those people, reaching out to them, encouraging them is a beautiful thing to do. And so anyway, that's kind of what I'm glad to get to do. Still do what I do here at Samaritan. Love being here. Love getting to talk to people and getting to share my story about these sorts of things. And I'm so honored to do it.
That's awesome. Dustin, I really appreciate your time and just the redemptive work of God in your life and God redeeming your story and your past and using that for the benefit of others. Where can people who are listening or watching, where can they follow you and where can they find out more about Samaritan?
Sure. So Samaritan, you can find them all over the place. I mean, the website is samaritanministries.org. Again, if you're looking for a healthcare option, reach out to them, call them. There's people who love Jesus on the other line that will spend as much time as you need talking with you, praying with you, see if it's a good fit for you. You can find Samaritan on all the socials too. If you want to reach out to me about something more personal, like maybe an addiction side or the abortion side or things like that, you can find me on social media too, Dustin Garrett. Also, I lead music at my church, Liberty Bible Church in Eureka, Illinois. You can reach out to them if you if you want to try to find me. Two, if you're in the area, you're looking for a good church. Or three, maybe you're trying to find some sermons online and want to listen to some sermons online. You can find them at libertybiblechurch.org. I've been leading music there for a number of years. That's one of the things that God also redeemed about that time at the rescue mission. Somebody donated a guitar. Thank you to whoever that was, because now I have a whole giant another purpose in my life.
That's awesome.
But feel free to reach out. And if anybody, especially with like the resources in regards to long-term recovery Christ-centered recovery programs, I'd be glad to give them some options that are around the country and that too, because I know there's a lot of people out there that have family or friends who really need that. The only caveat I would say is that, most of the time they need it. They need to know that they need it.
Right.
So the people that are out there that maybe you could see your family member and go, man, I know that they need to go there.
They need to praying.
Keep praying for them. Keep praying, and God will do just like He did to me. He'll show them their need, and then you can be standing ready and say, all right, I'm going to take you. Here we go. Hop in the car. So that's about it.
That's awesome. Dustin Garrett, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate you.
So thankful for Dustin and his time, but really his transparency, his willingness to share that story with us. That's what, the redemptive work of God looks like. Sometimes maybe not so dramatically. Your situation or circumstance or past would be different than Dustin's. But the reality is God has a plan for you today. And we forget that sometimes. We get stuck in what happened in the past, or we allow that to become our entire identity or to overshadow everything else that happens in our lives. When really what God wants to do is use that past for His purpose and use it as an opportunity to minister to others. And Dustin, man, did such a great job of talking through that with us. Please take some time to look at Samaritan Ministries. Reach out to Dustin if maybe you or a loved one is dealing with addiction issues or these abortion issues and questions around that. Very grateful for him. Take some time to subscribe if you have not yet subscribed. Share the content out with others. That would be fantastic as well. Very glad to be able to share this time with you and look forward to talking to you next time.